Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Real Positive Girl podcast. My name is Sabrina. Happy Tuesday to you all. I hope that you're having a great start to your day, whether your day is just beginning in the middle or the end. I hope that it started well. I hope that it went well, and I hope that you were able to accomplish many things. You feel strong and confident in what needs to get done, what you can get done, being reasonable with yourself, and being okay even if it was reasonable for you to get certain things done and you didn't get them done. You have to be loving and caring and not so tough on yourself if you aren't able to accomplish everything, because not everything has to be perfect. So, I hope that you're having a great day. This is just a reminder that if you are having a hard day, please take the 5-minute reset, which is to take 5 minutes to be by yourself. It allows you to restart, reboot, reset your day right from that point in the day, which you can do multiple times in a day. But it also gives you the opportunity to take a break from any problems or issues or burdens that you are carrying around, that you are currently dealing with, that may be dragging you down and preventing you from reasonably getting things done. Also, if you are struggling from any problems that you need to resolve with someone else, take the time to come up with a resolution by doing some problem solving in your 5-minute reset. Also, I want to make clear that your 5-minute reset just needs to be at least 5 minutes. It can be as long as you need. If you have 10 or 15 minutes, more time, the better, to give yourself a mental break. I also encourage everyone to come up with a list of at least 4 items that you are grateful for. Those can be big, those can be small, those can be medium size. It doesn't matter, just as long as you have 4 different things that you are grateful for. For example, today I am grateful for being able to get my new dresser for my new home, because right now there are clothes all over the floor, and later today I get to go pick up a dresser so I can finally put those clothes in the dresser and kind of get organized. It kind of drove me crazy, but a mess is a mess, and I just had to let it go for a couple weeks. So I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the snuggles with my dog and my cat. I am grateful that we are almost done with the work on our rental that we are working on, and I am grateful for having some ice cream during the day. So it can be anything, and you see how those things are all random. Some are small, some are medium sized. There's not any big ones in that, and that's totally fine. You can be grateful for the sun shining and getting paid and being able to be alive again and have your family in your life. You can be grateful for whatever you want. Just make sure it's a list of at least 4 things, because that is definitely going to help you manage your mindset and your perspective, and hopefully shift it a little bit if you're having a hard time focusing in on the positive and, really getting down in yourself and honing in on the negative. And last but not least, before you end your 5-minute reset, make sure that you're feeling at least neutral, if not positive, about the rest of your day, because again, hopefully taking some breaks from any issues or burdens that are troubling you, doing some problem solving and coming up with your list of things that you are grateful for will help to shift your mindset, so that even if you are going through a really hard time right now, it gives you an opportunity to, come up with things that are still amazing in your life that you can focus more in on to help you get through that hard time. And believe me, I'm not diminishing what you're going through. I understand life can be really, really tough, but it can also be a little bit easier to move through that negative time by trying to focus more on the good and positive things in your life. However, I do hope that you are having a fantastic day today. Just a reminder that this week we are talking about trauma. I apologize for not coming up with a better title. I was really thinking it through. I was like, man, I need a better title for this week, but it's just trauma. So that's what we're talking about this week. And today, Tuesday, we're going to talk about trauma and relationships. So let's go ahead and jump right in. The effect that trauma can have on personal relationships can get pretty heavy. A lot of times it can make even the safest relationships just fall apart. Like even ones that you are feeling so comfortable and, at some point you are feeling confident in it, it can fall apart if you don't do the work that you need to work on overcoming your trauma and the triggers that you have. And I'm not saying that you're going to be perfect at doing that or that you're going to completely be healed of everything. It's possible, but I'm not saying that you have to be able to continue in that safe and strong and committed relationship, that if you don't do any work at all, it's definitely going to suffer a ton. The biggest influence that trauma can have in our lives going forward is how to navigate through intimate relationships. This is especially true if it was childhood trauma and relationships were not modeled to us properly in the first place. And you're going to notice that in this episode, I am talking about relationships and trauma, obviously. However, I am going to hit a lot on the effects of childhood trauma within relationships, and later in the week we are talking about childhood trauma specifically, but it's important for me to let you know that a lot of times relationships are derived, the problems that we can have, let me step back for a second. Relationships and how we know what they are is derived from our childhood. So that's why you might feel like it's a little heavy on that, and then you're gonna be like, why are you talking about it again? But when I talk about childhood trauma, it'll be more in depth of how it happens and how it affects us. And this is just a single part of that. So anyway, so depending on how we were taught, relationships will reflect how we were able to practice healthy attachments within relationships, and this is super important because if we aren't able to develop healthy relationships and attachment skills, relationships are likely to struggle and possibly fail. So attachment, we are definitely learning attachment in our childhood, and that behavior is modeled to us by whomever our caretakers are, whether it is our parents or another family member, or maybe it was foster parents or whomever it was that was our childhood figure. They are modeling what we are going to take in, because as children, you're a sponge, you're soaking up every little thing, and if they aren't correcting that they are doing something wrong, you're going to think that's the right way to do it, and then that's how you're going to function through relationships when you grow up as an adult, which is why a lot of adults have trouble with relationships, because they take in what they see and they think that's the right thing, and then it turns out it's not. But it's hard to break those habits if you don't invest your time and effort in doing the work to change your mind. And you definitely can fix those mental habits that you've created essentially in your mind of how things should go, if you were taught incorrectly, which is not your fault. I want you to know that. It's just the way that it was modeled to you. And unfortunately, that's going to be extra work for you to deal with and to overcome. And I say that from someone that was definitely modeled relationships at their worst, and as we go through today, I am going to point out the things that I definitely identify with and struggle with and have been working on personally in my life. But yeah, it's very super important, because you develop those healthy relationships and attachment skills, or unhealthy, and they will communicate directly to relationships that you have in your life, especially intimate ones, but even just regular personal friendships and close other relationships in your life. So there are actually 4 different attachment types. There is secure attachment, there is dismissive avoidant attachment, anxious preoccupied attachment, and disorganized attachment. I definitely identify most with disorganized attachment, but let's go through each one really quick. Secure attachment is when you can establish trust in your partner. So this is the one that you want, right? So secure attachment is the one that we all strive to be. So it's when you can establish trust in your partner. There's little fear of rejection or abandonment. You're equally able to depend on each other. Communication is there and it's good. And emotions within the relationship are managed well. So that is the ideal that we hope that most people are modeled when they are children. However, that is definitely not the case all the time. The next one is dismissive avoidant, which will those people will equate closeness with loss of freedom or independence. They lack connection to emotions. They prefer to be alone. They like to avoid conflict until it just blows up. And they have trouble being dependent on someone, or being dependent on and depending on someone else. And I kind of view this type of attachment as like, why would I depend on anyone else when I can really only depend on myself? And if you want it done right, you do it yourself. That kind of attitude. The next one is anxious, preoccupied attachment, which can be those people can be very insecure and needy. They need constant validation. They're extremely emotional. They lack boundaries, which is very, very scary. And it's important to have boundaries. I've talked about it a million times on this podcast. And they take things too personally. Like every little thing is taken so personally to them, whether they were the cause of it or not. And then last but not least, disorganized attachment. These people have trouble choosing between wanting a relationship and being alone. You know, they kind of feel like they're stuck in the middle. They do want a relationship, but they don't want to have to go through the struggle of that and everything that comes with that. So maybe they want to be alone, and then when they're alone, they're like, oh, I don't want to be alone, you know, that kind of thing. They have trouble letting others in, and when they do let people in, they have serious abandonment issues and fear of rejection, fear of being abandoned, and it's hard to let themselves go through that. And when they do, it's just like, oh, that's all they worry about. They are very hot and cold with their feelings, so they can be clingy and needy one moment and then cold and distant the next. And they can also become detached and dissociated. And if you aren't familiar with what dissociated means, it means that you are just kind of like, feel like the way that I like to describe it is like you feel like you're outside your body, seeing yourself just going through the day and just going through the motions and not really as one with what is happening right now in your mind and in your body. So, and you know, those are all great, and maybe if you have some time, you can listen to this again if you need some more clarity or you kind of missed one. And if you do struggle with trauma in relationships, you can identify which attachment skill or lack of skill, you know, which type of attachment that you identify with most, to kind of, it's just, even just being aware of what your attachment style is will be very helpful in uncovering other emotional habits and issues and struggles that you have. And it's always good to be aware. It's always great to acknowledge and be aware of what your struggles are and what things that you need to actually take the time to deal with and overcome. That is like the first step of just like acknowledging and realizing, oh, these are my issues. And trauma can manifest in so many ways in our lives. You know, I personally feel like it can be suffocating, so suffocating when like I just feel like all the trauma that I've dealt with in my childhood, which is primarily where I experienced all my trauma, where it has definitely all followed me like a little stray cat through my entire life. And it's when I was in college when I started going to therapy. I really wish I had gone before that, but I was still experiencing the ongoing trauma of my childhood, which is why I just like escaped to another state to go to college, because I just couldn't deal with it. I got myself into all kinds of loans and debt because I just needed to get away. I just needed to escape. I needed freedom, and I do not regret the choices that I made because it allowed me to just detach myself from that whole experience, and it's what I needed. And again, I personally identify with the disorganized one because it's kind of how the relationships were modeled to me, but it also there was so much abuse, especially a lot of mental abuse, so it was hard to make decisions. But I also felt like I was continuously walking on eggshells, like I had to be perfect, like I had to take care of other people, which are definitely other, I guess, symptoms, quote unquote, of the disorganized attachment. So that's definitely what I struggle with. I still struggle with those things. Even reading that definition out to you guys is very much like, yeah, I do identify with those things even still, even in a safe, secure, committed relationship. There's still a couple of those things I still struggle with now and again, but it's also why I have counseling and other things to help me continually recover and overcome those issues. So let's go over some ways it can show up for us specifically in relationships, how the trauma can manifest after going over those attachment styles. Trust issues can arise. Of course they can, because if they saw growing up or in other, or even if you grew up and you had a great childhood and you were like had your secure attachment style and you're like fine, but then you go through one or several relationships where there was lots of abuse and you experienced trauma, then that can still affect you and change your attachment style as you go through those other experiences, because though that is where your source of trauma is coming from. And even if you did go through childhood and you had traumas, you could still come out the other end. I know I'm going backwards, but I just forgot to make this point. You can still come out the other end of having a traumatic childhood, but coming out with a secure attachment style if you were able to get the help and assistance to recover and become stronger and relearn how relationships are supposed to go before you get too far into becoming an adult or an older adolescent. So anyway, trust issues can arise because obviously you are unsure, and if you saw relationships before or you were in relationships before where trust was broken, then that can develop the issue of fear that you can't trust anyone because your trust has been broken or you've seen it broken and result in negative consequences. Another one is, of course, fear of rejection and or abandonment. This can also be a constant thing too, where you're constantly fearing rejection and abandonment, like I mentioned with the disorganized attachment, and then one previous to that. You have a fear of abandonment. You have a fear that, yes, you finally found someone that loves you and cares for you, but you're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're afraid that they're going to just leave you, or that if you do become too vulnerable and give too much of yourself, you will be rejected. The next one is trouble with being vulnerable. So let's say that you just can't be vulnerable because you have in the past and it's given you negative results, or you've seen the parental units or the caretakers in your life demonstrate vulnerability, and it came with a negative reaction from the other person. That can definitely be an issue. Another one is fear of getting into fights or having conflict in general. That is definitely something that I struggle with. It's actually something that both my husband and I struggle with, and something that we are currently working through, because a lot of times a fight will start with, I don't want this to be a fight, or I'm afraid this is going to turn into something big. We both kind of struggle there a lot, and I have this bad habit of wanting to tiptoe on eggshells and keep the peace, but I know that some conflicts and some fights have to happen, and you can't have a committed long-term relationship without having fights, without having conflicts. It's just impossible. And if anyone tells you different, they're lying, because it doesn't mean that your fights and conflicts have to be like yelling, screaming matches. They can just be like arguments. It just depends on how passionate you are and how well you have your emotions reined in and managed to determine how you're going to how a fight and argument could escalate and how someone reacts in the moment. It's healthy, but if you're trying to avoid it at all costs, that is definitely something that trauma could have affected and created in you. The next one is lack of boundaries. I talk about boundaries all the time. Boundaries are super important. You have to have boundaries in all your relationships, whether it's just friends, whether it's your parents, your siblings, your boss, your coworkers, and your partners. You have to have boundaries, and a lot of time trauma can just wipe away any feelings of boundaries because of whatever experience that you've gone through, or you've seen that boundaries will cost someone I don't want to say freedom, but they can cause them pain, and they can cause maybe one partner to be really upset that the other person has set boundaries, and so they just have to let them go and let themselves be walked all over. But the inverse of this is having boundaries that are super strict and rigid and not letting anyone in because of all the pain and hurt that you have experienced. The next one is always waiting for things to go bad. So that's the end of that list of ways that trauma can manifest in our lives. But yeah, always waiting for things to go bad. Like I mentioned at the top of the list, always waiting for the other shoe to drop, always just being in that relationship, things are going well and they have been going well for a while, and maybe this is the first time that things have just gone well without any issues or struggles, and you're just waiting. You have that impending doom that something bad's going to happen. You're just waiting for it to happen. It always happens. That kind of mindset. It's hard to get out of that kind of mindset. I will agree with that, because if your constant experiences of things always eventually going bad, and then it could turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy that if you're always waiting for things to go bad, you're always talking about how things are going to go bad, and then your partner just doesn't know how to support you in that way, and it does end up ending, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It ends and you're like, I knew it, something bad was going to happen. So I just encourage you to kind of step away from that thinking, because even if something does go wrong, or even if the relationship ends, it doesn't mean that that's going to happen every single time. It just means that one wasn't meant to be, or you guys weren't congruent enough, or you might need a break and you might need to spend more time working on your recovery and becoming stronger mentally, so that you guys can come back together. Because a lot of times, sometimes the other person is not as strong enough to support you in that time. Maybe they need to work on their supportive skills, and then you guys can come back together when you've had some personal time to work on yourselves, there's nothing wrong with that at all whatsoever. You could also do it together, where you both each work on what you need to work on and then become a stronger unit as well. So here are a couple ways to work on healing from traumatic experiences to have better relationships. And just so you know, at the end of the week, I'm going to talk about even more general ways to help you recover and overcome trauma and the triggers and the after effects that traumas can cause. So just being in healthy relationships that are supportive of your healing is one of the best things you can do. And I know this sounds easier said than done, because typically we involve ourselves in the type of relationships that were modeled to us, and those can sometimes be bad ones. But if you can be with someone that supports your recovery and setbacks, we all have setbacks, it's totally fine, totally normal, then you're in a supportive healing relationship. And again, it might be easier said than done, of course, and maybe you'll go through a couple tough relationships before you find that one that is strong and supportive, and that person was meant to be with you and help you get through those terrifying memories and moments and triggers. That's great. And if you're able to find that, that's amazing. It's amazing to always have someone that can help you and support you and push you through those hard times when you're really struggling, because there's always going to be a way for you to support and help them back. Maybe not necessarily with trauma and triggers, but in other ways that they need help and love and care and support in. So I would say do your best to open yourself up enough to be trusting, to let yourself continue to love, but not be walked all over. You got to work on those boundaries. If you are having trouble finding those healthy relationships because you're able to admit and understand that negative, poor, bad, abusive relationships were modeled to you when you're younger, or they weren't, and you just find yourself continually in abusive, negative relationships, you need to take a step back and work on your own personal boundaries first. This is just my suggestion. You can do whatever you want, obviously, but I encourage you, if you need more information on boundaries, I did do a whole week on the podcast about boundaries that could help you really have an eye-opening experience of what boundaries are and how you can develop your own, and the difference between the different levels of soft, hard, and not perfect, but balanced boundaries are. So I encourage you to do that. But yes, I would highly encourage you that if you find yourself in a pattern of those kind of relationships, you take a step back, you work on yourself, you become stronger, you create boundaries, and then you can step back in and give being in a relationship another chance, and hopefully find that person that you are meant to be with that is super supportive and caring and loving. It's also important to not identify the person you are in a relationship with as a savior, but rather a partner. They are not going to make everything roses and rainbows no matter how supportive they are. You have to be very careful of this, because even if you do find that person that is super supportive and will help you and wants to care for you, and doesn't matter how many setbacks you go through and is always there for you, do not identify them as the savior, as the person that's going to save you and help you and always be there to get you out of trouble or to help you, always, you know what I'm saying? Like, be the person that's going to be your hero in a way. No, you need to continually think of them as an equal, because they probably have, most likely, their own struggles as well in different areas, probably. Or, if they have had the same ones as you, but they have already gone through their recovery and overcoming process, and they understand how to help you, they still shouldn't be identified as a hero or a savior, because that's not what they are. They're supposed to be a partner, an equal to you, to help you, and you guys help each other back and forth. And it's not going to be equal all the time, obviously, because that's not how relationships are. But they are not there to just save you and rescue you from your problems and your issues, because they don't have that power to do that. Only you have the power to rise above what has happened to you, what you're currently struggling with, work on yourself, become stronger, and work on managing your triggers and your emotions, to be able to become a better, stronger version of yourself that is deep down inside. So just remember that they are your partner, not your hero. And lastly, begin to be aware of your behavior patterns, which will help you overcome those patterns and become stronger against triggers and fears associated with the pain of dealing with trauma while in committed relationships. Again, I talked about at the top of the show, it's super important to just be able to identify what you are doing wrong. And I know that sounds harsh, and I don't mean it in a harsh way, but if you are able to identify the issues and struggles that you have, the triggers that you have with your trauma, it'll be a lot easier for you to identify what type of recovery that you need to go through, what you need to talk about, what you need to work on first, and what you need to work on last, or what is already thriving due to whatever you've already done to work on that and become stronger. And it'll just help you get through the recovery process a lot quicker if you can just admit it. First step is always just admitting that you have a problem and you know what the problem is. And if you can see a pattern, it's easier to stop it when that pattern starts to happen again. So you can kind of just be like, oh, no, this is going on a pattern that I know is not going to end well, and you can stop it in its tracks, and then you'll just feel so accomplished and happy that you're able to continually identify it and then work on it not popping up as often. Okay, you guys, I think I have exhausted talking about trauma in relationships for one episode. And it's a long one, but I thank you for hanging in there. Again, thank you so much for listening to Real Positive Girl podcast. Again, my name is Sabrina. I hope you join me for some more episodes later this week. So tomorrow, we are definitely going to be talking about childhood trauma. And then on Thursday, we're talking about reminders for trauma survivors. So just some things to keep in mind after, if you have suffered trauma, whether it's in your childhood or in your adulthood or whenever it was, some kind of like affirmations and things for you to realize and believe and understand. And then on Friday, we're going to have our classic list of dealing with triggers and what to do to overcome trauma. But check the description box for notes for the show, where to find me on Instagram, which is at Sabrina Joy Perozzo, or at Real Positive Girl Podcast. My email is in the description, in the notes too, for any questions, comments, concerns, prayer requests, show topic suggestions, feedback, just to say hi. And that's it. I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your Tuesday, and I hope to see you for the next one. But until then, I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.